And now, let's take a trip to Sugarcane Fields. The northern coastal plains of Queensland produce around 94% of Australia's sugar. Aristocrats of labour, Queensland cane cutters are capable of handling anything from 5 to 8 tonnes of cane a day.
In the 1930s, there were some real problems in the cane industry, in particular cane grubs. Cane, when it's put into an exotic environment like Queensland, was eaten by cane grubs, which are the larvae from cane beetles that lived in the trees. The larvae burrowed into the soil and ate the roots of the sugarcane. That meant that the sugarcane couldn't draw water, it couldn't draw nutrients, and very often the grubs ate so much that the entire crop fell over. The Queensland growers were in dire straits.
Naturally, you would expect the farmers to be most frustrated, to have a promising crop, hoping to be able to harvest it and then see it become yellow and then start to fall over. It would be worthless, worth no money at all. It would be heartbreaking for the farmer to see that happen to his crop.
Yes, it was a real problem, all right. There was dead cane everywhere, farmers going broke left, right and centre. It was misery at the highest.
There was a lot of political pressure by the cane growers on the Queensland government to do something about this. In 1932, there was an international sugar conference in Puerto Rico. At that conference, there was a woman called Raquel Dexter, and she'd done some experiments with the cane toad. And apparently, the cane toad had had very, very good results in Puerto Rico. The guy who was chairing Raquel Dexter's session where she gave her paper was Cyril Pemberton from Hawaii. He got very excited about the possibility of the toad to cure the white grub problem. So he took 2 suitcases, filled them with wood shavings, and took those toads on the biggest journey they'd been on in 40 million years of their evolution. He took them from Puerto Rico by boat up to New York.
All aboard.
across America and across the Rockies by train, down to San Francisco, and then on a boat back to Hawaii. He released them in Hawaii and they set up home in the Pacific. The Queensland government came upon the idea that they should really try the toad in Queensland because it was so successful in Hawaii. In April 1935, they sent Reg Montgomery across to Hawaii to meet with Cyril Pemberton and bring some toads back to Australia to see how they would go. Cyril Pemberton helped Reg round up some toads. They put them in the suitcases again, and the toads and Reg travelled in pretty good luxury from Hawaii all the way through to Australia.
All aboard!
When it docked in Sydney, Reg got on the sleeper train up to Brisbane in Queensland. There was a lot of enthusiasm from growers. This toad, that had quite a reputation by now, was going to do wonderful things for them. It was going to eat the cane grubs and save their industry.
News from around the world and from around Australia. Brisbane and the hopes of the sugarcane industry sit squarely on the broad shoulders of these humble creatures known as cane toads. Seen here for the very first time on motion picture film, they are all set to go to war against the greyback beetle. By the look of things, this sturdy fellow was eager to go to work. So 3 cheers and welcome, brave champion.
I was with my dad when we released a dozen or so of these toads into the lagoon straight opposite our house. He thought it was the saviour of the sugar industry.
My father pointed out the first cane toad that I ever saw and said, it's going to grow much bigger than that one you see there now, and it's going to eat up all the cane beetles.
No, when the advent of the toad, he said, oh, well, we've got the cane beetles by the balls now. In actual fact, we didn't have them by the balls, they had us by the balls. The toad did nothing whatsoever to eliminate the beetle problem.
I just can't comprehend because, you know, they were brought here to eat a bug in the sugarcane. That bug is 2 meters up in the sugarcane. It's in the flower of the sugarcane. Cane toads are not very good in climbing sugarcane. That couldn't have worked.
And when the toad didn't work, my father made the following statement, that is this: depart from here, you cursed creatures, into everlasting flames, prepared for the devil and all his bloody angels. I hate him. I hate him in every respect. He's the worst thing that's ever been brought into the country.
Gordonvale's the place where cane toads started off. There were heaps of them. At night time, if you wanted to go to the outside dunny, there was a track through the grass and there was cane toads everywhere along that track. And because I didn't like the damn things, and they'd jump onto your feet and everything when you walk along with the land. In the wet season, the little baby toads that come out, you couldn't count the number. There'd be thousands and thousands and thousands.
Cane toads can breed in big numbers. And when they lay their eggs, they're not laying 1 or 2. It's sheer volume. You know, a female can lay 30 to 40,000 eggs, and sometimes you can do it twice a year. The mating behaviour usually starts in the late spring and summer, and it's the male that instigates everything. The call of the cane toad is quite beautiful. It's quite dulcet. It goes something like this. And if you see male cane toads, they've got very strong forearms and they've got big thumbs, and he whams his thumbs in behind her front legs and into a rib cage. And once he does that, she starts extruding her eggs.
The major key to the success of the cane toad is the capacity to produce eggs at the drop of a hat in vast numbers. So to be able to produce 30 or 35,000 eggs twice a year gives it a tremendous advantage over any native species which only produces 100 eggs once a year. It's curious if you look at the rate at which it is moving across northern Australia. Given what happened in, the 1930s, 40s, 50s, it's as though the cane toad scarcely moved at all other than to link up some of these small populations on the Queensland coast. But now it's running rampant. This is really unheard of for any species that is a stowaway or is a sort of introduced form into another area. They are really nothing more than sort of vacuum cleaners wandering around trying to find food.
A toad's a nomad, a wanderer. It's what he does. He just keeps expanding. Maybe he's eating himself out of house and home and has to keep moving. He's very much a vagabond, isn't he?
Queenslanders do tend to have a sense of hopelessness with this issue. They think, well, there's just too many toads out there and what can you do? So get used to it.
Well, I was born in a toad-free Brisbane in 1949, And within a matter of just a few years, it seemed that the toad had covered the whole of the Brisbane area. At the Toowong High School Oval, you could see that amazing scene where the whole of the ground just shifts and there are literally tens of thousands of freshly metamorphosed toadlets.
Just about every night they're under the light. They come under that at night time and they eat the insects that fall. And I'm pleased to see the cane toads snapping them up. That's all that is about cane toads. I don't like the look of them. If a person is ugly, he's not very popular. That's human nature, I'm afraid. That's the way it goes. Poor little cane toad, he's ugly.
My grandmother used to tell me, you'll get warts, you can't handle toads because your hands will become full of warts. So there are all these, you know, all stories about them, how dangerous they were and ugly in many senses. But as I said, I don't find them ugly, and I know lots of people who don't find them ugly at all. They shouldn't be here, but they're not ugly animals.
Toads are quite beautiful creatures. They've got this nice protruding brow, and below it you have these quite stunning eyes, golden, black, flecked. And they're quite pleasant to look at. You can just stare into them. Sometimes you feel like you could fall into them. I had a cane toad, Betty. She was huge. I used her to publicise the impacts of cane toads. But the problem was that she was so big and so attractive, she just became a media star. A reporter might say, geez, she's big, can anything mate with her? And I say, oh no, it might be very difficult to find a male to mate with her. And next day the articles would come out, nothing about the problems of cane toads, and say, Big Betty looking for big macho male. She died one day on Australia Day from overheating.
When you think about Queensland and the cane toad, I mean, the legacies it's going to leave, I mean, we used to be called the banana benders, but you never hear that term anymore. It's cane toads, you know. And, yeah, it was just a part of our life. My wife and I decided to build an hotel in Serena, and the majority of the southern tourists, they always, when they were booking in, say, will we be able to see a cane toad tonight? They'd heard about cane toads, they're fascinated by cane toads, and they wanted to see one. So we thought, well, why don't we capitalise on it and use the cane toad to promote a nice little friendly cane town like Serena.
The romance of Buffy is what keeps Buffy alive. I was approached about 2 years ago by the ladies of the Craft Centre to do a calendar. It was like Calendar Girls, but with a bit more of a wow factor. And that was a bestseller. It went all over the world, and they raised money for the jail. From that, they asked me to do the postcards for the toad.
I think you could take some really nice shots of toads, I've done it, where they actually look cute, because they have a funny smile on them, and if you get the right angle in the front and a bit up from underneath, they look funny. Yeah, they're great. They have this smile, you know, and they look innocent.
And I see it and I think, now, what can I do with that? What angle can I use that will emphasise something dramatic? I wonder if I can just tweak it a bit and make it more interesting. That's all I did. Photoshop. It's being creative without a great deal of effort. It just happens. We need colour. A lot of grey people in the world. They were going to get a grant at one time and paint it as I had designed it in the more psychedelic colours, but I don't know whatever happened. Nothing happened. And shortly after that, somebody stole the toad. Somebody moved it. And then, of course, there was great controversy. They put chains on it and chained it up.
There was condoms hung around his neck at one time, and the name of the mayor was put there beside the condoms. I think he's been dressed a couple of times and brass put on it and all that sort of thing.
I love him. I think he's great. He's great for the town, and, well, what other icon could we have? He's, you know, it's so symbolic of this area.
Well, I doubt the IQ of those people. I really do, in all due respects. Fancy erecting a monument of any kind to a creature like this. He's got no place in the society, none at all.
I drive past twice a day on the way to the craft centre, and I rarely see people flocking around the toad. Probably at the time that's all Serena had, so I think they had to have something. I have no idea how they came up with it, but it wouldn't. I really can't think of anything else. What else?
Well, I can't read and write, but I've been gifted with my hands, you know what I mean? And as far as I'm concerned, I've done a good job of anything I've touched. When I do things, I put my heart and soul into it. I had plans to build a museum, but it was running too much money, so I come up with the idea of a travelling toad show. So I started mucking around, tanning them and stuffing them and that, and I put my mind to it and started building the trailer and building these toad displays. I built a four-man tag team wrestling ring first. Just something that come in my head. At the time, I got some extra decent-sized toads, and I made them the baddies and that, and the smaller ones I made as the good ones. And it just shows you the little blokes really getting knocked about and all that. The next one I done was the 4-lane intersection car smash. There's fuel tankers all smashed up and motorbikes and smashed cars. And there's bits of bodies laying everywhere. And I got them set up as like the parents there crying. The next one I done was the nightclub scene. Well, you got to snip the backbone and then prise the backbone away from the skin and then pull everything out through the mouth. You don't make no cuts in the skin at all. And then you just stuff them with the stuff you put in your pillows. When they're stuffed, you can bend them into what position you want. The Travelling Toad Show wasn't a success around Queensland, really. Queenslanders and that, they had a different outlook about the cane toad, you know. That used to get people walk past and no way in the world I'd pay money to go and see dirty old cane toads and all this and that. And it was disappointing. I put everything I had into it, and whether other people, if they didn't like it, you know, it was their problem. I'm proud of it anyway, so really speaking, I don't care.
I first expressed my concerns about the cane toad in 1963. I was reading the literature and I found that they were highly toxic. There were reports coming in of impacts upon domesticated animals, cats and dogs, for example. They'll go and play with a frog or a toad. They do it all the time. And if they ate them, they died.
Wallace is a very much loved member of the family. I treat him like one of the children. He's got an excellent personality. He's just very lovable. And he's mine, so he's special. He's special because he was given to me by Michael on Valentine's Day about 5 years ago.
Oh, yes. I always get a kick out of the reactions because Vicky is in control of every situation except for when I surprise her.
Come here.
She'll normally shed a tear. Oh. It's quite romantic.
He was definitely a very special gift.
Very special. Very, very special.
He was a very dominant dog.
He had a very strong personality, very dominant personality. He was the one that sort of ruled the household like me. I think he picked that up from me, I think. Because I'm the boss, aren't I, Michael?
Yeah.
He's my dog. He follows me everywhere. So, yes, he knows when I'm not around. So, doesn't he?
Yeah.
He sort of frets a little bit. So, wherever I go, Wallace goes.
Well, come on.
I got to the bottom step and this cane toad jumped up from around the corner.
Wally! No! No, don't! Wally! So he just simply grabbed it and then let it go. Obviously, the cane toad sprayed him. Straight away, I instantly knew that I needed to grab the dog and wash his gullet out.
So we thought he was fine then. We didn't think anything of it until we looked over and...
My first reaction was that he's dying, you know, he's going to die.
Dick, it's Wally!
Defends itself by producing a series of toxins which are produced from, well, if you look at a toad, they look like sweat glands. They're on either side of the head. There's sort of these little patches and the toxins seep out through those pores onto the skin. You know, the way a dog attacks a piece of prey is generally to open its mouth and clonk on the either side of it to crush the brain. So they then get this liquid, sticky toxin into the mouth, and yeah, you just get this incredibly distressing, shrieking, screaming noise from the dog.
Frogs and toads are the cannon fodder of the animal kingdom. Everything seems to eat them. And because the cane toads don't have a label on them saying, "Don't eat, I'm toxic," it meant that any species which devoured them in the normal way would die as a result.
We were conscious of the fact that toads were a threat to the Northern Territory, and it dawned on everybody that they were migrating along behind the mangroves at the bottom of the Gulf there.
The reason that people argued that it wouldn't get across the Gulf was the large number of enormous rivers which discharge into the Gulf of Carpentaria. The thought was that these were so vast that the toads would be restricted to the eastern side. As it happens, they went across without any trouble whatsoever.
I thought they would have been slowed down a fair bit going across the Gulf of Carpentaria. But of course, it wasn't a slow point at all. They're actually going quicker than ever. And that generated a lot of community concern.
There were lots of people stirring it up even back then. They were crossing the border. There was a proposal to fence the border and all sorts of extraordinary things that would never have worked.
I thought it was quite likely that the arrival of cane toads could have an effect on the native frog fauna. Every species of frog makes a different sort of call, and so we can monitor native frogs by listening to them calling. We wanted to set up listening stations down about a 110 kilometre stretch of the Roper Valley Highway. There's a microphone plugged into the computer, which would listen for the mating calls of the frogs and would also track the arrival of the toads.
I was one of those who mistakenly believed that the cane toad would simply not be able to survive the long dry season. But such is their brilliance, I was completely wrong. Every biologist in Australia must have been staggered to hear that cane toads in some places were travelling 1 kilometre a night. And that for a little creature that's half as big as your shoe is really a remarkable feat.
Once the toads got around the bottom of the Gulf, they hit much richer country, more frequent rivers, billabongs, and their rate of progress just was exponential. One of the most remarkable things about this whole toad invasion is how they've conquered the Australian landscape. They've come across all these different habitats where even our own native animals die very easily. I don't think any other native animal would have been able to establish itself at the speed that these toads are doing it.
I reckon we're down about 10 to 15% on baby crocs. I'd found a croc on the river, but we opened its mouth and you could see down in its gullet, and I reckon we could see a cane toad down there in the poison down its throat. Kills them very quickly. When you work and live on the river like we do, you see a lot of things that the scientists don't see. Out in the field that I'm in all the time, I do see the drop of the numbers. We've had ghouls, goannas here, sand monitors. I haven't got dogs or cats. I've got wildlife here and we don't see them anymore.
These things, I think, are scary to Territorians. Very scary, and the last thing they want to see is their native wildlife obliterated or their dogs dying in their backyards or that sort of stuff, and, you know, from such an ugly creature.
The first time I walked in was the next day, and he was just flat, no movement, no nothing, and just a lot of tubes and everything in him. The vets came up to me and said that there was nothing they could do for him, that would be better if he would be put down.
If he's not in any pain, then there's really no reason to sort of put him down or anything, because he's a fighter, and I know he's in there.
You take a risk if you persist and the dog survives. You might have a vegetable dog, if you like.
I wouldn't put one of the children down, so I wouldn't put one of my dogs down. It's just me. It's just how I am.
At that stage, it was quite traumatic for us. We're basically waiting to see, give us a sign, is the dog going to live or not, you know?
I thought, did I really see that? Well, I cried and I called his name and his tail just moved up and down, and then I thought he was definitely in there.
So he fought back and, as I said, you know, Wallace the Wonder Dog, he came back from the dead. He's definitely changed.
Yeah.
Now he's more like, oh, well, you know, what the heck type attitude. it's the personality shift in some ways has been good because he's not as dominant. He doesn't want to fight with other dogs now. He tends to run away. So there is some pluses for it.
And he likes his baths. He seems to enjoy himself, doesn't he? He
seems to be self-amused.
It's like, hey, you know, Daisy. So no one's home. So it's very cute. He's just happy to be here. He's happy to be back at home and he's grateful just to sit on the lounge and watch television. So it has given him brain damage, I think. So he doesn't really do much doggy things now, does he?
No.
Where luscious green replaces red, where the ancient palms still grow, a little north of the turning point where the Catherine River flows. Her waters are sweet, her path is bold, an awesome gorge her track, nearby the town that bears her name, First Lady of the Outback. I remember hearing them saying they've crossed the Queensland border and they're now in the Territory. And I think for a few years, not just myself, but a lot of us listened to the developments. They're now at Borroloola. And people said, oh, we've seen them on the Stuart Highway at Daly Waters. Next time they're at Mataranka. And the year they hit Catherine, there was just swarms of them. I, heavens forbid, thought about things like flamethrowers and everything else, you know, stand in front of them and try and stop them. But there's too many of them. Why couldn't we have just had aerial bombing across the whole front of them?
The deadly cane toad is on the march again. Now Darwin is the new frontline in the fight against it. The toad's predicted to invade the city by the end of this wet season. A new national task force is meeting there to find a solution.
Humpty Doo is a very small place. We originally moved out here because we like to have a little bit of space for our children to grow up in. When they were toddlers, they could run around, no clothes on, no anything, go up to the local supermarket. Everybody knows who your children are. Well, I remember getting a phone call when the cane toads first arrived here from Marinda. She was very, very excited. Well, excited but also distressed because we found the first cane toad.
We had heard that the cane toads like dog food, and I went to feed the dogs and I moved it, and there it was just sitting there like that. I'm not a screamer.
You shriek at times. You might have gone...
Like that?
Yeah.
Might have done that. And I thought, shit, is that one or not? And you just knew it was because it was so damn ugly. But I don't think that we thought they were going to be here that quick, you know?
No.
The behaviour of toads at the invasion front is really bizarre, and it's different from what anybody has seen before in any amphibian in the world. They were really an invasion army coming towards our study area to a much greater degree than I'd ever expected. The approach that my group, the Team Bufo, has taken is to genuinely try to understand what toads are all about, to understand the impacts that they have on natural systems, and to develop new ways that we might control toads. Greg Brown was strapping radio transmitters on toads as soon as the first ones got close to us, and we discovered that these animals were travelling enormous distances, much further than any on the planet has ever been recorded to move. There's a remarkable phenomenon that's gone on in the last 70 years since cane toads were released in northeastern Queensland. Essentially, it's become a foot race across tropical Australia for the toads. The kids that are at the front of the invasion are the fastest moving toads, the most athletic toads, so the best athletes are breeding with each other, and we call it the Olympic Village effect. So it's a cumulative process, and in Australia, it's produced a fundamentally different kind of a toad. These large, long-legged, incredibly active individuals that disperse huge distances whenever they can.
Well, what is going to stop it? How are they going to be brought under control? I mean, what are they going to be like when they get to the Western Australian border? They'll be as big as camels.
Cane toads are invading the top end much faster than previously feared, according to a new study using radio transmitters. Scientists are warning that the first toads could reach Darwin as early as next month.
Once they were in Katherine, it was only a matter of time before they'd be in Darwin. When you drive down the track, you see them all the way.
It's a bit like an army on the march. To think that, oh my God, this was going to take out parks and towns and everything in its path. It was a bit of a no-shit moment. It was quite scary.
Toads are public enemy #1 in the territory. They're like a commando. They're like an invading army. They've invaded our territory, and certainly they've got to take the consequences.
People should take the problem into their own hands, that they should try and kill as many of them as they possibly can by any means that they can.
As soon as they came onto people's properties, everybody was vigilant. Everybody in the street would be out. You'd wave to neighbours as everyone would be driving around, running them over on the roads, and so
even when they were dead, running them over again.
Practice makes perfect, I suppose. I think I've got better at hitting them than what I did 12 months ago. Oh, you just feel the squelch. And you can sort of hear the noise, even with the air conditioner on.
When they're in such plague proportions, people will resort to any method. We wanted to achieve, I suppose, a quick death.
We found Dettol works well. In fact, I go out and do my little constitutional with the water bottle at night, and I'll get 8 or 10 or 12.
He's nothing but vermin in every essence of the word. I think there should be a bounty put on his head.
My suggestion was, you know, just encourage people to encourage their kids and just kill a toad. Hit them with cricket bats, hit them with golf clubs. We'd spear them with whatever we could find, a sharpened stick or a star picket.
I just put them in a big bucket and boil up the kettle and just tip boiling water over them.
Put the muzzle of an air rifle down their throats and blow the back end of them out. Connect that to the contraption to the exhaust of your car and you gas the toad.
Use your imagination, strap a cane toad onto a skyrocket and let him go, you know.
Somebody has made a cartridge of toad loads for 22 calibre rifles, and you know, I was quite amazed by that.
To each his own. I think the territory's a pretty tough place, and if the toads come to the territory, they should expect some tough treatment.
What we do is we put them straight into a bag in the freezer. One of my children said, it's like they're going on a holiday, like a free trip to Alaska when we put them in the freezer, isn't it? So it made my kids feel better about killing them if they were going to the snow or something like that. Well, we taught our children that, you know, well, we don't kill anything. Everything's God's creatures sort of jazz, you know, so we'll try and euthanize them in the nicest way possible.
But I wouldn't put a bloody toad in my freezer. That's ridiculous, and most people wouldn't. You don't want dead cane toads in your freezer. I come up with the idea of hydrated lime in water. And I made some calipers. If there's going to be death of anything, it must be quick, in my opinion. But like I say, they die with a smile on their face. They're not injured. Other than they're dead. What I reckon is cool is these hens in batteries and birds in cages or cattle in feedlots. They're the people that are cruel. But killing a toad, I can't see how it's cruel. Or any of the meat dishes you eat, it's cruel. People that catch a fish and play him in a line for hours, some big fish, you tell me that's not cruel? Of course it's cruel. The definition of cruelty is when you see bombing people in another country. It's shocking, isn't it? Killing and maiming people in another country under the guise of security and all that sort of stuff. It's shocking.
You always need a scapegoat.
So you go down until you can find a scapegoat that you can hammer without any retribution to yourself. And then you get some high priest from some university with a PhD, professor this or that, to tell you it's all fine. Well, he's a jerk. You don't need that. You can think it through yourself. The toad sanctuary here is really unofficial, but the idea is just people can't bash toads here. I don't feel any great love for them or anything. They're just there, and I think they've got a right to exist. And I think that's the basis of it, that they have a right to be themselves. You're not going to stop them by beating individual animals to death. They don't know that there's anything wrong with them. They're just themselves. There's a toad here. We call him Joe Hockey because you'd need a hockey stick to get rid of him. A golf club wouldn't do. He's pretty big. He comes in regularly and he sits in the dog's bowl and has a swim and goes over and eats the food and goes back to the bowl. You can always tell when they've been here because it's all muddy. You know, they don't wash their feet before they get in the bowl. He obviously has a slightly difficult life. Yeah, I wish him well.
Ambulance, what is the town or suburb of the emergency? Okay, what's the exact address of the emergency? Okay, what's the problem? Tell me exactly what's happened. Is he conscious? Is he breathing? Okay, I gotta get you to answer a few questions for me and we'll get the ambulance on its way.
Guys from 240. We'd received the call out from the communications centre. Code 1, which is emergency response, life-threatening event, lights and sirens. The scenario that we walked into was very unusual. I've not seen anything like that before or since.
On Friday, the 21st of January, I was present at Bowen Police Station when a call was received from Townsville Ambulance Control. An ambulance from Bowen was currently en route to the scene and they requested police to attend. Mr. Graham Seeley led police to the caravan and I then observed that the body of the deceased was laying prone to the ground. I further observed that there was laying close to the deceased a makeshift metal spear. It consisted of a long tubular metal aluminium pipe and that it had a carving knife embedded in the end of it to make the point of the spear. I then observed that laying approximately 1 metre away from the deceased was a power extension cord which ran across a pathway from the caravan to the power box. I then approached the owner of the caravan and the person identified to me by Seeley as being a possible witness to the incident.
Had you or him been drinking at all this evening?
Yeah, we'd just been sitting outside having a couple of beers.
It was ascertained that the deceased and herself had been outside the caravan at about 6:30 p.m. attempting to kill cane toads with the homemade metal spear that was present at the scene.
Friday night, I got the call that somebody had received an electric shock. The deceased's partner stated that she was present when the deceased had pierced an extension cord while attempting to spear a toad. I then proceeded to inspect the hose covering the extension cord in an attempt to locate the position where the spear had entered. Tests undertaken on this extension lead and at the accident site indicate that this damaged cable was the active or live wire. Contact with this cable would produce an electric shock or electrocution if a path to Earth was made. Contact through a metal spear and through a person's hand down through their legs, which are in contact with the ground, would provide such a path to Earth.
In view of the above, it would appear that the sudden death of the deceased was nothing more than an unfortunate accident.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. Any loss of life in unusual circumstances is saddening, but this one was just a little bit off the off beam. It was something I'd never heard of before.
The actual sight of somebody lying in the dirt, with a bit of mud, just with his shorts on, it does have an effect on people. Life can be taken away from you very, very quickly. And you only need all the holes in the cheese to line up. And in this case, with this particular person, all the holes had lined up. That event is very much a part of me now. It definitely stays with you.
Any animal that knows it's invulnerable tends to be very calm, it seems, and they simply wander around with this extraordinary air of confidence. They're quite calm, you can pick them up, you can play with them, do what you want with them and put them down, they'll just hop away. No stress for the toad whatsoever.
Wenn sie fällt, dann schreit a tissue, we all fall down. I used to sing Dairy Queen, the odd sort of nursery rhyme, but a lot of them were in German. Yeah, I used to sometimes sort of help her dance a bit while I was singing songs to her, so I don't know how much she enjoyed that. Dairy Queen got her name from actually an ice cream brand. You used to get these tubs of ice cream called Dairy Queen in massive sizes, sort of in 5-litre tubs. And so because Dairy Queen was, of course, an extra large cane toad, she ended up copying the name Dairy Queen. It was a bit difficult. I did get a little bit of teasing from friends and quite a lot of people laughing at me and things like that, and I learnt to deal with it. Every pet you have when you're younger is an amazing companion, and that's what I found with Dairy Queen. She wasn't a cane toad to me. She was just one of my pets that I loved dearly, and I found her quite charismatic. Yeah, she was a great companion. I was never too sure what happened to Dairy Queen when she sort of passed on. Mum just sort of continued to tell me that she was living in this amazing toad fantasy land. So, and I was quite happy that she'd gone back to her friends and was where she belonged.
I was actually approached by Graham Sawyer, who showed me some documentation and his battle, or the battle he wanted to wage against the cane toad.
There's 3 basic elements to a cane toad control. There's the trapping, the fencing, and then there's the hand collection, or toad busting, as we call it up here. They're really the 3 elements.
The fence runs north-south. It's just a simple, soft barrier. Now, the toads have got this hard, bony head, and their solution to obstacles is to headbutt the obstacle, not to hop around it or over it like our native frogs do. They just charge into it. The idea of the fence was to confuse them, was to break up their migration for as long as we could.
are ridiculous. How can you fence a toad? Build it, you know, like the wall in Israel or former Berlin Wall or whatever. Any heron just landing in a pond will get a few cane toad eggs on its legs and then fly over the wall and then put the cane toads on the other side of the wall.
The Northern Territory government came up with the idea of a trap competition. The original concept was to research traps and attractants and other things as well.
Traps are no good without an attractant. The toad's primal instinct is to breed, and the call is a breeding call. It's saying, I'm here, baby, come and get me. The Toad Blaster is a speaker system. It's waterproof horns with a 12-volt amplifier. Well, every frog has a different frequency of call. Like the green tree frog, which is very common up here, is down low. Rap, 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 rap. The marble frog, which is another native, is at the other extreme up high. Meep, 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 meep. And the cane toad sits in the middle. It's about 600 hertz, and it's And at the end of the valley, we have our fencing that will concentrate them, and we have traps. I'd like to think I'm a modern-day Pied Piper, bringing the toads in towards their own destruction.
The government suggested that we buy cane toad traps. They suggested that different kind of lighting seemed to be more effective than just a white light. But to date, we've caught jack shit in our traps.
Whilst trapping, fencing, a great biological solution I see as the answer.
Trying to make a virus that would kill them is absolutely ridiculous, because if that virus would have escaped Australia, it would have killed toads in the rest of the world.
That's the other big question mark, of course, is will government have the balls to get out there and actually put a biological solution into the environment?
Even if you had made a virus that would never escape Australia, that was specific to just to cane toads, which is virtually impossible, it would never have killed the whole population.
One of the issues we had when we were looking at this stuff was what you do with all the bodies. And someone suggested that you could make a fertiliser out of the toads. The process is very easy. We stockpile all the toads in the freezer until we've got a big batch. We then put those into a big vat and add the potassium hydroxide. And the potassium hydroxide's got a very high pH level, so no bacteria and germs and stuff can survive in it. And basically they melt down into a brown soup, and that brown soup has quite good nutrient properties for fertiliser.
For me, I've got a certain amount of customers, and so I keep expanding in the research and development. As far as my leather goods go, we made bum bags and caps and toads hanging out of the caps and sun visors and belts and wallets, and a lot of people are quite happy that it's an exotic skin, but not every lady likes a toad bag to have a head on it. The potential really is in the medicine side, like the Chinese already know and have been doing for thousands of years. They develop toad cake, which is concentrated venom, which the Chinese encapsulise to keep it fresh and then sell it to Japanese pharmacies who turn it into pharmaceutical products and stuff that'll even rival morphine. I've got some little files over there that they're using the gallbladder from a cane toad. Now, that must be so small. Well, I only know one guy who took one of those vials I've got there and swallowed it. He said he had palpitations that was coming out of his chest. He was red hot, flushes. That'll get you high. That'll get you hallucinating into another planet.
The biggest amount of media hype that happened around when the cane toads first arrived was more about the interest in this sort of mild intoxication that some dogs get, where they get just quite addicted to licking toads.
Dobby is a 4-year-old crossbreed. She's quite a sweet dog. She's very smart. She can be very stubborn as well, though. Dobby. She first started chasing toads probably about 8 or 9 months of age. That's when we first caught her with one.
Dobby, leave it. Dobby.
Dobby? Dobby. She tends to get a little high on them. Her pupils will dilate. She'll act a little bit trippy. She won't want to come when she's called or anything like that. She certainly seems to understand that there are certain side effects of cane toad poisoning. Is happy to deal with the consequences of those.
This phenomenon of animals deliberately getting intoxicated by cane toads is just fascinating. It just seems unbelievable that an animal would go back for a second try.
Dobby?
But nevertheless, we do have many documented cases of patients who deliberately, on a regular basis, will seek out a toad, and they seem to be able to lick the toad in such a way that they only get a very small dose.
It doesn't affect her on a day-to-day basis, so I don't think it's certainly fitting a true definition of addiction. She certainly enjoys it. Dobby? 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 You okay? You right?
I guess if you're going to anthropomorphise it, it's kind of like an LSD trip.
Dobby? Dobby? Dobby?
Presumably it must be quite pleasant for the dog. And they do it again and again and again. Again and again and again. And who knows what's going on in those dogs' minds.
Dobby!
They're spending millions of dollars trying to eradicate them. There's other people like the Chinese who have been investing in the therapeutical benefits from toads for thousands of years. The very first thing they should do is set up a trial toad farm. And so that venom, you can just milk it by picking it up and squeezing it out of there, put him back in the pen, feed him up, in another few days' time, he's going to be ready to milk again. And then we wondered what we're going to do with the rest of the frog. The Chinese themselves will eat the cane toad. Not a problem at all. His back legs is just like a nutritious green frog to them. They want a bite, they can't get it. And so everyone could benefit out of the cane toad. I actually like toads a lot now. Before I used to take the air rifle around on Friday night and pop them all and send them out with the garbage. But I owe a lot to the cane toad. He's been very good for me and the family. So I have much more humanity towards them now.
We called him Melrose. People might say I was crazy, but he was just like one of me kids. Put him on me head and walk around with him on top of me head and put him on his back and tickle him underneath the throat. And I used to worm him and I fed him. Cockroaches and that, he thrived on them. Then I had his little show pen with a swimming pool nut in it and a little opening where I used to push the door open and the cockroaches used to come running out. As soon as he heard the rustle, knew it was coming. You sit there and look up at the door of the cage and his tongue would be going 50 to the dozen. They try to get him in the Guinness Book of Records, fatten him up to get the world's largest toad. But I overdone it, really. Overfeeding them and that. Because he couldn't hop. In the end, he couldn't hop, he was too heavy. He used to just crawl. Well, I went to feed him one day and he was laying in his water, dead. A heart attack. And it just felt like part of me was dead too. I froze him. I froze him for quite a while, and then I eventually tanned him, and then I stuffed him. I wish I still had him.
The marketing stuff's still a little bit up in the air for toad juice, but we decided to approach one of the big hardware chains, and they weren't really interested until we had quite a bit of it. We were stockpiling it. The only problem was the batch was still a bit too fresh and was still fermenting. It was just a gas hazard, pressure in the bottles. I mean, you could see it in the bottles. They were really, really tight when you picked them up.
One of the truly spectacular things about the cane toad invasion is the directional nature of the toad front. They're essentially toads that are travelling in a straight line down the road in a consistent direction. And I think what's happening is that toads are looking for a nice, flat, open, linear corridor that will help them to head west as fast as they can. We've created those, we call them roads, and the toads have taken advantage of them.
I know that Darwin, for a while there, tried to do something about the toads, but they lost interest. They appear to have not continued through.
It's all talk, and they don't care. I mean, it's no good them sitting down there saying, oh, of course we do care. They've done nothing. They've done absolutely nothing.
I mean, it's government. They've been so quiet. They've really, in a sense, diffused the issue.
I'm saying to them, put some money where your mouth is and fix this problem before it does escalate right across the top end of Western Australia and down the west coast, because it will happen.
The only people making a difference at the moment are the public. They get out there and they collect toads. We've got an advancing wall of toads going west in the Northern Territory, and that's only been disrupted by people. And all we are really doing is buying time for Western Australia.
I was asked by Kimberley Toadbusters to become involved for the reconnaissance side of the work, so the volunteer group could get in there and do the mop-up work. The highway front line is the one of most concern at the moment because that's where the cane toads are closest to WA, and it's also the path of least resistance for the cane toads. We have become quite good at identifying daytime refuges where toads will hide, under riverbanks and other locations like that where they can get good shade. At Crock Lagoon, it was quite an amazing sight. It's probably the largest concentration of cane toads that we've seen in any one small area.
These toads will hibernate in these cracking clay holes. They don't necessarily need water. So if a water hole is dried up, we can no longer guarantee that the toads have died with it. None of us could believe it. In one night, we pulled out 6,180 toads. It was like watching a moving carpet.
We find cane toads that may be 5, 6 years old. They've travelled such a distance that they've actually worn their toes off on their feet, and they end up having small little stumps, and that gives us a real indication that these toads have really travelled quite some distance.
We are looking at multiple corridors of toads. And if you look at the full length of the West Australian Northern Territory border, it's a pretty large area. We have narrowed those corridors down to 6. 3 of those, quite likely, will get across into Western Australia. Not if the Kimberley Toadbusters can help it, I might add. The Kimberley Toadbusters is a 2,500 volunteer group committed to stop the toad coming into Western Australia. It's a bit like a military campaign, really.
I think of those brigades in the desert, even in the Second World War, where you hear about those 8 of them out there against 500,000 on the other side, and it feels like that sometimes.
Everyone's geared up because we are working in obviously snake country, crocodiles, wild buffaloes, wild pigs.
It's incredibly dangerous. And if you're with people who are trained and skilled in that wilderness, then you feel very safe. I mean, I'm a city slicker, and I remember once I got heat stroke on a trek with her, and she just threw me in a billabong fully clothed and fed me fruitcake till I'd recovered. Toad busting at night, it's always on rugged terrain, so you really want your hands free if you're the toad catcher. So you go diving for a toad while your partner spots it and holds the bag for you. And then you go to bed, and that might be 2 or 3 in the morning, and then you'll get up at, I don't know, whenever Lee's got the bacon and eggs on.
Kimberley toad busting is not just about removing the toads, it's also understanding their behaviour, and it's understanding what we're dealing with. Are we dealing with a male colonising front, or are we in fact dealing with an area where we've got males and females getting ready to breed? So every toad that we remove is measured, it's sexed. One of the difficulties that Kimberley Toadbusters have had is to try and get scientists to accept that what we are doing in the field is science. They tend to treat our data as anecdotal. They look at the Kimberley Toadbuster volunteer movement as a bunch of rednecks out there, which of course is not the case. We use CO2 because it's clean and it's a gentle way of doing it and it's very quick. And so the CO2 is pumped into the bag, the bags are sealed off and they are left for about an hour before we actually then bury them.
Oh, the invasion's going to go on. They're not going to stop it. They're actually wasting their time. They can't stop it. It's simply practically impossible. They're looking at a few little spots and a few little gardens and a few campgrounds and a few billabongs. We've got huge rivers and billabongs everywhere and swamps that stretch for miles and miles. They're not going to stop the cane toad.
I'm a bit embarrassed as an Australian that we can't come up with a solution. Yeah, I think by now we should have. We've now got traps. We can divert them with fences and so forth, but they seem to have us beat on every turn. The next thing on the agenda for the toads is Western Australia, and the first thing they come up against is the Ord River system, which is heaven if you're a toad. There you've got a water storage area 8 times bigger than Sydney Harbour. They can breed at any time of the year, and over there they'll be able to breed all the year because conditions are good. They're just going to love that. So that will be a major battleground between humans and toads there, and I hope we can hold them off here as long as possible.
It is truly remarkable that despite all of the fantastic activities that can be undertaken by the human race, the magnificent pieces of equipment that are being developed, our capacity in space, and yet we still haven't come to find a way to control the cane toad.
You're not going to set the clock back. You know, the toad is now here. You can bash with golf clubs till you're blue in the face. It's not going to make them go away.
They've got no place in society. They don't belong to you at all. They're in Hawaii somewhere. Send them back over there to Barack Obama.
The federal government is giving $6.5 million to save the whales. What about helping your own country and eradicate these blasted animals? We're our own worst enemy, aren't we?
It's not the toad's fault that they came to Australia and caused the death of animals. It's our fault. We brought the toads here to them. It's an alien country with alien animals, and we're the cause. And the cane toad will eventually get where it wants to get or can get, and that's the way it's going to be.
It's a remarkable story, there's no doubt about it. This is an epic.